force triangle is what I'm going to call it, and I'm just going to draw it out every time I do it because obviously you can confuse yourself trying to figure out what is this thing again. So in the triangle, force is on top. You can do the old one-hand cover that we did with electricity. Remember electricity, it's voltage up top and then amps on resistance down on the bottom is the one we normally use. But pressure definitely equals force divided by area. And if you just say it really fast, you know, I've got 30 PSI. What always gets me is I'm thinking, my pressure, but because 30 PSI, you're saying the whole thing, is I've got 30 pounds divided by a square inch when you're saying PSI. So I'd recommend just grab the force triangle. I did find another one, and there, there's an extra letter. Say that again, Sydney. Yeah, that thing. My brain has a hard time with mnemonic because I want to put a P in the beginning somewhere. Mnemonic. Anyway, forces push anything, or force pushes anything. That's how they're saying to remember it, is force up top. So force pushes anything. I was like, oh, that's kind of clever. So sorry about the first day, but that's the triangle to try to clear stuff up on there. So I want to click down a few slides and get back to basically that one, but we're going to redraw it and just run through a couple math questions for the fun of it, and we'll draw some names out of the hat. So I'm just going to draw myself basically that same system. So I got a piston on this side, I've got a piston on this side, and obviously that one's higher area. So if we just throw some numbers in there and see what we get, let's say this piston's 2 inches squared, this piston is 4 inches squared, and we'll say I'm pushing down with a force of 20 pounds. What force would be felt on the piston on the right side? And for a quick review, while Leo works on it, you're the man, Leo. 10 pounds. You say what? 10 pounds. You're going to say 10 pounds over here. So for a quick review, if you get back out to your force pushes anything triangle, this is like the total picture, right? So our force would be up here, so 20, and we know we got 2 square inches, so pushing down 20 divided by 2 is going to be 10 PSI. So if we want to just grab our triangle, and we know it's going to be equal because we said it's kind of a balanced system, right? So on this one, we know we're 4 inches squared. So 4 over here. We don't know what the force is, but we know it's 10 PSI because, what's that guy's name? Pascal's law. So Pascal's going to say 10 PSI. So we just run the math. 10 PSI times 4 is, Leo, 40. So we'd end up with 40 pounds of pressure pushing that piston up.
Force pushing up. Using the pressure down, right?
We gave him the pressure down. So we'll do another one.
So the force down would be...
So this force down is 20 pounds.
The pressure would be 10
10 PSI.
PSI. Yeah.
10 PSI here times 4 square inches is going to give me 40 pounds of pressure pushing up. And a sanity check, the bigger piston, if we're balanced, always going to be more force. Bigger piston, more force. So sanity check is, the bigger the piston is, you got more area, right? So it's gonna be more force when you come out. So, we'll run that one again for the fun of it. Okay, so let's go with, a half a square inch. 0.5 inches squared, and we'll make this one 3 inches squared, and we'll say we're pushing down with a force of 100 pounds. 100 pounds. What force is going to be felt pushing up on the other side, assuming we're basically balanced? Sam Yoder. 600, says Sam. Alright, so we'll just double check it in our triangle. If you're good with math in your head, you can just do the ratio, right? My ratio is 6 to 1, so he just multiplied it, and pretty quick. But if you're like me, teaching in front of a class, trying to do mental math, you'll make mistakes. So we'll just throw it in the triangle. So force is 100 pounds. Area is 0.5. 100 divided by 0.5 is going to be 200, right? Yeah, so we're going to have 200 PSI. And if you get these on an exam or written, I'd actually recommend when you get that far, go ahead and write the 200 PSI in there. And that way, if they ask questions on, hey, what's the pressure that's acting on the wall right here? You'll be able to say, oh yeah, I wrote it down, no problem. There's going to be 200 PSI acting on the wall right there. All right, so then we'll run over to our other side and say, well, we know it's 3 square inches. And we know it's 200 PSI. So 200 times 3, 600. Good job, Yoder. All right, everybody seeing how that works? Cool. All right, so we're going to switch up the math a little bit, switch up the drawing a little bit. Let's see, can I make it straight? I can make it straight. All right, I got a little piston on that side. I got a big piston on this side. And I'm going to put a force of 150 pounds on this piston. This is filled with fluid, by the way. This piston is 2 inches squared. This piston is 5 inches squared. How much force is on that piston there? Anthony Walker. 375, you say? Okay, so we'll run through the math a minute. We put in 150 across 2 inches. 150 divided by 2 is 75. Oops, I wrote it on the wrong side for me. Still would have worked, but 75 PSI. I could write that in here. And we come back, 75 PSI across 5 inches, 75 times 5, that must give me 375. Okay. All right, everybody seeing how we got that? Making sense? All right, if we change this up to vertical, we'll do a vertical one. And we'll give ourselves a big piston on top. Now we're gonna, we'll do it the other way around. Big piston on the bottom. All right, so we're gonna say this is our landing gear, trying to, the weight of the airplane, just for the fun of it. So that goes down to a tire. Got our fluid in the middle. We'll say this is 5 inches squared, and we'll say this one is, 1 inch squared, just for the fun of it. And then, we'll ask the question, we'll say, we need to be able to push down with 1,000 pounds of force to push our landing gear down. We want to push our landing gear down. How many pounds of force would we have to put on the small piston? John Stoll.
Came up with 200.
200, he says. I'll do one more here. It's from all right, so 1,000 pounds is what we know it'll take. 5 inches, 1,000 divided by 5 is 200. Is that right? 200. So that gave me my 200. I put those backwards again, didn't I? But 200 psi. So 200 psi crossed 1 inch. 1 times 2 is 200. Now, this is back to that silly question. So you're telling me, John, if I put 200 pounds of force on there, it's going to move? What would I have to do?
You would have to have no weight.
Yeah, how much? Who knows? 201? So the way we'd phrase it is, it'd have to be greater than 200 pounds, right? Because 200 pounds is where everything's balanced out, we wouldn't get any movement. So we'd want to put more than 200 pounds of force to actually make it move. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. If we wanted to go one step further then and say, okay, I pushed this, how far do I got there? 3 inches. I pushed that top one 3 inches to lower my landing gear. How far is my landing gear going to go down? Elijah. 0.6 inches. That sounds about right. And how we got that is, so you go to the ratio, right? It's a 1 to 5 ratio. So you've got to multiply your 1 to 5 ratio by 3. So 3 times 1/5 equals, and that must come out to 0.6, right? Is it a 6 like that, or is it just a 6? I don't remember. Just a 6, okay. Not a math major. All right. Everybody understand what I just did and why that is? We got a much smaller piston here and a much bigger one there. All right, one last one and we'll move on. I don't think I said that yet. All right, back to our container. This one's 1 inch squared. This one is 6 inches squared. Oh, you know what? We could make this really complicated, just for the fun of it. I don't remember how I wrote the exam. We could say this piston is a 1 inch diameter, and this piston is a 3 inch diameter. And we're going to say, I'll put the food in there just to, you know, make it fun. And we're going to say there is 200 pounds of force on this piston. And we're going to say we I'm just gonna pick a number. 75 pounds of force on this piston. What's going to happen? Everybody can figure it out, but we're gonna pick on Abednego. So like height for them while I do my math. The question is, I put 200 pounds here, I put 75 pounds here, what's gonna happen? I'll do it in front of you, so I don't have to do too much math. Maybe we should just have everybody do it, and then I'll start drawing names until we get the right one. It's not a bad idea. I mean, it'll be the first one, right, Abednego? You'll be right. I just did a lot of math I didn't need to do, I just realized. Tricked y'all. Yoder's back there going, why you have a calculator, Jason? Alright, tell me when you're ready, Abednego. No rush. How many of you guys realized why I didn't need a calculator? About 2 of you. And then figured it out.
Need a calculator.
Your writtens are the same way. There may be some questions where you run through the whole math, and then you look at it and go, alright, what's gonna happen, Abednego?
I was thinking that on the other side, that one is 125, and then here is 2, so the difference is 8. That's what I.
So my question is, are our pistons gonna move in what direction?
This direction.
This one's gonna go up or down? That one's gonna go up. Alright, final answer? How many people agree with Abednego? Oh. So, the reason I realized I was backwards is with a quick look, smaller piston, bigger piston. So I've got a smaller piston with more force, and I go, oh, that's gonna easily lift a bigger piston, because the force transfer ratio is gonna go over. But if we ran with the math, what we ended up at was a 0.785 diameter piston on this side. If you take the radius, so area of a circle is pi R squared, radius squared. So the radius of this is a 1/2 inch, so 1/2 times a 1/2 to square it, times pi gives you 0.875 on this piston. And this piston, pi R squared, is 1/2 times 1/2 times pi, and that gave me 10.7-ish. We'll say 10 inches squared. I'll just cut it off for significant digits, because all we were asking was up or down, right? So that gave us our diameters of the areas of our piston that we could put in if we wanted. I'll say this one's our
That one was 7.065.
7.065. Oh, the 10 is the pressure that it would have theoretically. Area, let's see. Force pushes anything. So area would be over here, 7 inches squared, 0.785 inches squared. If I put my force on this one, 200, force on this one, 75. If I ran the math on our, let's see, this one was my left.
10.61.
There we go. 10 PSI is basically what we would be making over here if everything was balanced. On the other one, it's like 254 PSI. So 10 PSI, 254 PSI. Which one's more? This one's more. So basically, he's making more pressure, if you want to phrase it that way. So this guy is going to win, because that force would essentially make more than that one. So you can look at that a couple different ways, but that's how the math would run through. So we're going to review that again. We'll do a little different shape and do it tomorrow. So if you want to on your own time in lab, go ahead and draw some of your own up. It's a good little practice. When we get into de-booster valves, basically this is the same kind of math we're going to do. So we might put in a force of 100 PSI with our foot, but we're putting it onto a big piston. Backwards. Put it onto a little piston, and it's going to boost the pressure up into our brake system. So that math is something we're going to come back to, so don't just forget about it or say, oh, it's all theory. So make sure you understand how to do that and what's going on. That would have been a good one to print up some sheets for homework like electrical class and have you practice, but the way I'm going to put it is we're not going to make you turn it in, but make sure you understand it for yourself. Is this an open center or closed center system, Austin? This is in fact a closed center system. So notice our selector valve, when it's not feeding pressure via these guys, when it's not feeding pressure into our actuator, there is no path for it to go through the middle. So if it was a open center system, those selector valves would have a little path drawn in. So that is a closed center system, because when it's not selected, there's no fluid that can go through the center of the valve. Are we tracking on that one? Okay. Is this a constant pressure system, Zach Kuvar? Yes, it's constant pressure. So closed center equals constant pressure, with maybe very few exceptions of if we're shutting pumps off and using locks or something. But this is, you got to memorize it, and then the other part is just open center or not. All right. And we'll draw some names out and review some of those pictures later too. I think all the rest of mine are labeled, so I can't open center in the drawing is this way. And remember, open centers, they're gonna say are typically in series. So each actuator is, one comes after the other, comes after the other, where our closed center ones are in parallel, if we have more than one actuator. So either one of those actuators could, well, I guess the way you phrase it is they could run at the same time in a constant pressure system, in a closed center system. What we're gonna do, and then we'll come back in for today's official lecture, is we are going to run out and look at the mock-up on the Arrow together, just to get you a little familiar with it. We are going to look at the mock-up board, and I want to, yeah, that'll be it. So we'll go to those two things. I changed your PowerPoint from yesterday that I updated. The weird part is still, oh, there it goes. I had to re-put the video and it works. This is not a video we're gonna watch in class, but it's 17.
Let's take a look at the landing gear hydraulic system of the Piper Arrow. Now this system contains a lot of moving parts, and unfortunately there's not a lot of great resources to explain what's going on within this particular system. But the resources that we're going to use to dissect the system is
And I clipped out a little bit better picture that's clearer, so you can see these manifolds a little bit clearer. Not going to go over it in great detail today. They tried to kind of show what's going on in the power pack here, which a power pack we'll learn about later. So you got a pump, happens to be reversible, and there's some valves and stuff we'll learn about later, check valves. This one shows that emergency extend really well. You notice it connects the one side, we'll say the top side of the actuators, to the bottom side of the actuators. So if we open that valve, those actuators can just flow fluid from one side to the other, no big deal. Otherwise, how that system works is our pump will run and it'll either pressurize this one to push the pistons down, or it can essentially run in reverse and pressurize what would be the blue drawn now, which would push the pistons up. So that's the same drawing here, and we'll go over the internal workings of those later, but basically it's a reversible pump going on there. So as you're getting familiar with that system, if you wanted to go back to this slide, you can. This is a link to, it's actually like a 10-page document designed for pilots that does a really good job explaining kind of the system and operation in a textual format. So you'll have to highlight it and add it to your browser. But if you get a chance in lab, that would be another good one to go look at and read through. Get yourself familiar with that Arrow mock-up. Okay, let's head out there. I'll do the demos, and then we'll take a little break before we come back. first started instructing, I had a joke every day. And then I started running out of jokes, so you got to me. So this is like the start of where I started instructing. So you get a joke every morning, so don't be late for class. So the DEA agent and the bull. So there was this DEA agent, and you guys know what that is? Drug Enforcement Agency. So especially out west, but they go check on farms to make sure nobody's like growing marijuana, growing stuff illegally. So he shows up at this farm, and the old ranchers there working on a fence, kind of ignoring him. They don't want the government around, right? And the guy says, "I'm here to inspect your property." And the guy goes, "Okay, don't go out in that field." And the DEA agent goes, "What?" And he goes, "Don't go out in that field." "Sir, do you know who I am? I'm the DEA agent." And he whips his badge out. He says, "This badge says I can go where I want, when I want, whenever I want." And the guy goes, "Okay, just don't go out in that field." The guy's ticked off. So he goes out into the field. And about 5 minutes later, the farmer, rancher, is kind of finishing up his work, and he hears screaming. He looks over his shoulder, and the DEA agent's running just as fast as he possibly can. And not too far behind him is this big Brahma bull. Those are the bulls with the big hump on the back. And it looks like he's gaining speed. I don't think he's going to make it to the fence. The DEA agent shouts out, "Show him the badge!" All right. So most of my jokes starting out, that's a good one. You guys, maybe tomorrow. Show him the badge. Most of my jokes starting out had a point is you're learning in here, don't just do it to get the license, right? So you might be able to half learn and still get your A&P certificate, but that certificate's only a piece of paper, doesn't keep the bull off your back when you're trying to keep people safe and do good work. Reservoirs today. That is the big thing we're doing today. In your book, I believe pages 8 through 12 of chapter 12. All right, a couple just facts coming at you. Reservoirs. Reservoirs are where we store the hydraulic fluid. They must be large enough to hold all the fluid, plus room for expansion and entrapped air. That's a big part. So we need to have a little bit of extra space. I don't know if I put it in here. I think there's percentages of how much extra space that prepware might get to you. We might cover that later. But it's got to have enough room to hold all the fluid, plus some extra space and or trapped air. There's two different styles. We could probably call it a bunch of different ways, but every reservoir is either going to be considered pressurized or non-pressurized. And we will cover that a little bit today. I do have a reservoir here. That's a big one. This is one that shows up in, you could say, a bunch of your drawings. It's got a sight glass on there to tell you how much fluid would be in when it fills up. This is very similar to the one on the beach jet. You can look in the bottom when you get a chance, and you can see the standpipe, which we'll cover later on. So there's a reservoir. They will always be labeled on the reservoir, they should, with the fluid that goes in it, right? So down on the tag on the bottom, it says mil-H 5606. So when you're refilling, that's what you put in. Now the word servicing, I always had a problem with. What does servicing mean? So get kind of stuck in your head. Servicing just means we're going to top off the reservoir. Or if there's too much, you might take some out, but usually that's not the thing. So if somebody says, go service the reservoir, they're not saying, go do a complete inspection on the reservoir. Now, obviously, if you see something wrong with it, you're going to want to do something. But servicing just means, hey, go ahead and top off the tank. Old gas stations used to be service centers. Now, part of that might be because they work on your car, but they're going to service your car with fuel. They're going to top you off with fuel. Okay, this is a power pack. I hate saying that because there's no engine-driven pump inside this thing. But this is the power pack, I think the model that is in the Apache. If If not, it's very, very close. And we're gonna cover power packs later, but this big old can in the top is actually the reservoir in this particular hydraulic system. So we've got a bunch of valves, we've got a pump, so technically we can call it a power pack. Even though there's two hoses that go to the engine-driven pump on here, but this reservoir is the top. You'll notice no sight glass, and the reality with these ones is how they fill it on the Apache, which is the same as what used to be the Aztec. Those mock-up stands are very similar. Is basically we're going to pump fluid. If I remember right, it comes in here, but I'm not 100% sure. We're going to pump fluid into one of them until it overflows and comes out a hose that comes out basically right behind the front wheel. So what we'll end up doing is getting a bucket out by the Apache that's jacked up and a pan, because unfortunately the way they designed it, the hose goes right on top of a tube and then drips all over the place. It's an absolute mess. But basically all we do is we either gravity feed into that little hose we pointed out, or you could pressure fill it by using pressure. All that means is you're going to use a pump to push in. But you're going to push fluid into this thing, and when it's full, it's going to overflow out that hose right behind the nose wheel. Kind of crazy, right? When's it full? When it's leaking on the floor, that's when it's full. So we're going to cover that at the end of class. But this is a reservoir as well, slightly different style. The 210 reservoir is, if I'm not mistaken, under the floor, co-pilot side. That's a good one to get a peek at when you get a chance. Beach is in the tail, and reservoir on the arrow we pointed out was in the little power pack, right? So we got reservoirs all over the place. One of the things for the beach is on the beach there's a cap that you'll take off, and it's got a little filter when the cap's off. That's a pretty fine screen, so don't overfill. You probably can't get your head up in there because, like, yeah, that's about what it's like. So you can't really see. Last year we were trying to fill it, and we couldn't fill it because we started adding fluid to that little thing, and it would just overflow out of the fill part, and we'd never get it. And they actually thought maybe the sight glass was bad or something, till I looked into it, and the little screen pulled out, and the thing was just plugged up with junk. So we pulled it out, washed it out, put it back in, and then, no, it worked really good. You just put the hose in the thing and fill it up, and the level comes up, and not bad. But follow the manual, because if you were to overfill that too fast, even with the screen, it's a pretty tight mesh screen. And when you're doing it, if you want cap off, I believe the thing just pulls out. You can look at it, but don't do it too fast. Most of the time when we fill reservoirs, it's going to be with at least around here, a little guy like this. Dean has a whole bunch of these, and last year's students did a terrible job. They were back in a little box, and there was like a half-inch of fluid. They were all swimming. So Dean did a really good job of cleaning them up. He's getting new hoses on them. Normally, we're not adding much because we don't lose much fluid, so we'll use something small like that. But depending on how low the beach jet is, that might not be enough. So I made this up. There's a bunch of different styles. Notice I was a good boy, and I labeled it 5606. It's nothing in it yet, so I guess I was an overachiever at the moment. But prepping you guys, if you were to take, I'm gonna cut myself on my fancy thing. Oh, you're kidding me. Oh, I super glued the hose in. I thought I super glued the cap on. It goes all the way to the bottom, so you would fill that up with a funnel or something. What this doesn't have that makes me a little bit nervous is I don't have a filter system on this, so just try to be careful that we don't get dirty fluid in this. So you could fill this thing up, put it in the filler on the beach, and give it a little squeeze, and you're going to get a fair amount, and then you might have to come back down, add more. But it's going to be a lot faster to use something like this than this. If you worked at a fancy place like Duncan, you're going to have more like a mule like we have, and you'd roll the mule over and just put the hose up there, and you're going to use the hand pump and fill it up. The problem is, well, our mule is probably going to be in use somewhere else. So giving you options, lots of options on filling. All right, so reservoirs. supplies operating fluid. That one, think like a brake caliper. When you push the brake, you use up fluid. So if it's a spring return actuator, you might only fill one side of an actuator. So it might take more fluid when the actuator is activated than when it's not activated. Boosted brake systems are similar in that there'll be a hydraulic system, and when you push the brakes, we're sending fluid somewhere. So the level in our receiver reservoir, sorry, refrigeration days are catching up to me. The level in our reservoir might go up and down a little bit depending on what we're working on. And when you get far enough that you're working on the Apache, what you'll notice in the instructions, and it's very specific about, and I can't remember which one's which, we'll cover it later, but one of these would operate the flaps, and one of them would operate the gear. Gear has priority, so I think this one's the gear, and this one's the flaps. It's very specific about, it wants the gear up and flaps down, flaps up, gear down. I'm not gonna give away the answer, I'll play dumb. The reason for that is it takes a little bit more fluid to have the actuators situated in one position versus the other position. So they have you fill it up in the, I think it's the slightly less fluid position, so that you don't fill it up and then move all your stuff away, and then you switch positions and we're leaking fluid all over the place again. So they're really specific about where the actuator is. That's part of the supplies operating fluid part. Replenishes lost fluid is obviously from leaks. That's part of it. And then also overflow for excess is, yeah, let's say we have to refill it in one position and we switch all the actuators around, it changes it, and it goes, oh, I gotta come back. Or in a braking system, let's say you put new brake pads on, and now the pistons are pushed further in, and you'll cover that in landing gear class. We're gonna push fluid back into our reservoir, so it's overflow. Also, when we warm up our fluid, it does expand a little bit, so it's gotta have room for that. It's a place for purging bubbles. Where would bubbles come from? Purging bubbles. How would bubbles get into my hydraulic fluid that's out in my actuators and hoses? Not leaks. Usually my hydraulic pressure is higher than the air around it. So, servicing is typically the place that we get bubbles. When I say servicing, maintenance, so I'm working on the system, I've got hoses disconnected, I might end up with some air that I introduced into all my hydraulic lines. Typically, the way to get the air and air bubbles out of our hydraulic lines is we're gonna operate the hydraulic system. When you get that far on the beach, I believe they say, is it 30 times or is it 50 times? But basically to get all the air out of the lines on the beach, they have you put the gear up and down, it's either 30 or 50 times. 25 times, it's a lot of times. Yeah, so, and that's to get the air out. So, our reservoir is a place that as you're doing that, the air can work its way back to the reservoir. If you had, yeah, if it's, yeah, it's not so much a poorly designed as if you have bad fluid, and it foams, but yeah, gives it a little place. But we were gonna say, we install fluid that doesn't foam, so we'll put it that way instead. Collecting and separating foreign matter. Basically, because on the return, it makes it a great spot for if there is a piece of crud. It's gonna tend to come back to the reservoir at some point. So that means when we have filters, we almost always have our filters either at the reservoir, on the reservoir, very near the reservoir, because it's a great place to filter our hydraulic fluid. That reservoir is missing a few things, so we're going to talk about them in the next few slides. Talk a little bit about this, pressurized or not pressurized. Often the pressurized are via bleed air on jets. through an air pressure regulator, which we'll talk about. There's another style of pressurized that's hydraulically pressurized we're going to learn about today. Hydraulically pressurized reservoirs are pretty cool, and I've never worked on one in a working aircraft because I'm just a bush pilot. But pressurized or not pressurized. What they want you to know is the non-pressurized is not for violent maneuvers, so you can't fly inverted, stuff like that. High altitudes is a problem because with no air pressure on that, kind of what you're thinking is our reservoir is gravity feed for our fluid to our pump, and our pump's sucking pretty fast, right? Give me fluid. If there's not enough air pressure on that to suck into the pump, it makes it easier for the pump to cavitate. So having air pressure, because we're down at sea level, helps push fluid to our pump so it doesn't cavitate. If we go up really high, less air pressure, our pump could cavitate. So aircraft that fly very high typically are going to have a pressurized reservoir, or the reservoir will be in a pressurized area of the aircraft. And that's so we always supply fluid to the pump is how they say that. Often bleed air on jets is around 40 to 50 psi. So our reservoir could be pressurized anywhere up to about 50 psi if it's a jet with bleed air. That's a fair amount of psi, and it doesn't necessarily vent itself when you shut the jet off. So on the beach, that's a big reason why you follow the instructions when you go to service it. You might have 10, 20 psi in that reservoir, and if you just take the cap off with your head stuck up in the hole, what's the biggest thing we're worried about? Spraying fluid all over, right? So you don't want to just pull the cap off real fast, spray fluid. You surely don't want to take hoses off or the filters off. You wouldn't want to do that while it's pressurized. So follow the instructions, follow the steps. Here is a little bit more advanced reservoir. We're going to talk about what they're calling the standpipe quite a bit. Now, this image is they took our reservoir and they sliced it clean in half, right? Well, I guess they didn't slice the threads in half. So, these standpipes, picture that is a full tube. It's a tube that's running up into our reservoir. So if I was to take my red marker, where'd my marker go? Red marker, there it is. If I was to take my red marker, is there sight glass? Sight glass, right there. All right, everything's filled with fluid. We're happy until we get shot by the enemy. And now we're leaking fluid out, and we're leaking fluid out. My level's going down, my level's going down, and now my level's down, way down to here. I'm almost out of hydraulic fluid. This is a problem. Normally, our system is fed through the standpipe, but the second outlet is for an emergency. So say our system, we get shot by the enemy, and we dump all our hydraulic fluid off, and flaps aren't working. We go, oh, wait a minute, uh-oh, we might be able to isolate that system, or we say, well, we got one more shot at putting our gear down. So we've got a little bit of fluid left in our reservoir, and we can draw it out the bottom in an emergency situation. So most of the emergency connections, or you could even say alternate connections, come out of the actual bottom of the tank, where our typical connection for our main system is through that standpipe. So they'll call it the standpipe on that. The other thing it does, I don't know if you'd say it's designed that way, is going to be pretty hard to suck any crud through the main one in normal use, right? So that's kind of another feature of having it on the standpipe. That kind of goes out the window when you say, well, that means your emergency one could suck up crud. I'm like, yeah, hopefully we don't have crud, and that's the emergency one. So there's two hopefullys there. If you stack two on top of each other, you're a little bit safer. All right, baffles. This one shows them as fins. They're drawn in weird, but basically on my oil reservoir for engine oil that we'll go over later, that one has the baffles. This one doesn't have baffles, but a lot of times the fluid is returned into the side of here on an angle so that it swirls around as it comes in. is typically how they do it. That kind of helps with taking out the air in the system, because if you have a little bit of a swirling motion, the air will come out. But in our hydraulic systems, they will, especially as you get towards the bottom, they'll have fins and baffles, because they don't want to make a vortex in there swirling around down where we're actually drawing the fluid out of there. So we'll have fins and we'll have baffles to keep it from sloshing and splashing, so that we don't have a bunch of air bouncing around down here. Our air might be bouncing around just in the top section. Does that make sense? Cool. Standpipe equals supply line. So when you're reading prep work questions, if they say standpipe, you got to be thinking, okay, my standpipe is what's a little bit higher than just the bottom of my tank. That's my supply line. This image is made so that you understand where all the transducers are in a hydraulic system. Transducers, that word transduce means they're going to change one thing to another. They're going to change a pressure to an electric signal. So this is not necessarily laid out to show you how the hydraulic system works. It's laid out to show you where all the transducers are. But it gives us a good picture. So here's a transducer, there's a transducer, there's a transducer. That's what they were trying to show you. But it was a picture with a reservoir. Dean doesn't like this picture. Looking specifically at the reservoir, why do you think we maybe don't like this picture? Artist conception. Not so much that it drips down. Be thinking standpipe or primary outlet, secondary outlet. It's like a Where's Waldo thing going on. So the standpipe is drawn in right, our primary right. It's not going to suck the fluid right off the bottom. But check out our emergency one. It doesn't cap the line off. The fluid can't get down through there. And you might be going, really? That's kind of nitpicky case. And I'm like, well, the point of the thing is to show us where the fluid goes. So this would be, you're going to call it your emergency one off the bottom of our reservoir. If you're to look stuff up, I believe most of these are an AC driven pump, AC motor pump. So it's kind of like a backup pump, where our main one comes over here to my engine driven pump. So that's my main hydraulic engine driven pump, where that's an AC one. So theoretically, that bottom is my emergency pump, is why it's coming off the bottom. See this black line right there? I can't really pass fluid through a line. So if you were like, well, it must be going in behind the line, I'm like, yeah, but they didn't cap that line, so fluid can't come in. So that's why on some of these drawings in your book of the FAA, it messed it up. It's hard to tell. I guess you could say the same thing on this one, right? That one's capped, that one's capped. They should have left them all open like they did the standpipe. So basically, the guy that drew this knew enough to leave the standpipe one open, but he didn't apply the same principle. And I believe the reason was he wasn't trying to draw that. He was trying to draw your transducers. But be aware of that. Here's another one with transducers. Same kind of idea. They did a little bit better. Now we can draw it out of the bottom of that one, but now we capped my standpipe off. This one is drawn, you'd say, more correctly, right? I got a standpipe feeding a couple pumps, and then we come over to here. They capped my standpipe off again. So point being, really they were trying to draw these out to show you where some components are in transducers, because some of these arrows are just like, and it's going to that whole part of the system. It's not even showing us actuators, but it's showing us the lineup. So if I was on this one, the standpipe's always going to go to my main pump, right? So CDP, something driven pump. I don't know what the C is going to be, but probably going to be something like the engine driven pump. The bottom one coming off is going to be off backup or the secondary. So RCMP is probably going to be something motor pump. I tried looking these up at one point. It doesn't really tell us much. But that's how you could know if you were looking at this. It's a standpipe, probably going to be my main one. Bottom of the tank, going to be my backup or my emergency, which often is just a motor pump. All right. Back to the simpler one. Standpipe is my main supply for my engine-driven pump. And you'll notice my hand pump, which is just in there for backup for emergency, is coming off the bottom of my tank, because really, we're only going to use that thing in emergency. Now, the emergency might not be we're low on fluid. The emergency might be that my engine-driven pump stopped working, but they'll pretty much always connect the emergency pump to the very bottom of the tank. In fact, the same kind of thing. Let's say we had a leak right here. I see that hand, Parker. I'll get to you in a sec. If I had a leak right here, that's going to blow all my fluid out, or even maybe it's the motor itself leaking. The fluid in here might go and get low enough that now my main pump isn't sucking fluid anymore. But this valve, remember, if the pressure's high enough, acts like essentially a check valve in that it'll connect this to this, and there's check valves we'll go over later. So if the fluid got low, I could still force pressure in with my hand pump and get my gear to actuate one more time to put the gear down, put the flaps up, whatever I'm doing. So be really aware at pictures and drawings, and when they use the word standpipe, know, hey, that's my main supply. All right, Carter.
In that other diagram, just right before, for some reason in the book, the CDPs and DEP, and the other one was the
Ah, they corrected your book, I bet then. And that would make more sense. So the one with the standpipe is going to be an engine-driven pump. So hopefully they corrected the book. But that's exactly the point of what you're looking at and why I threw this up there, is you should be able to look at it and know, yep, standpipe's my main one. I mean, you can do a Google search, or it'd be in the manual for what that is, but I don't even think this is a real aircraft. They just said large commercial. They didn't give us a number like 737, or they were just like, we're just gonna make one up. So I'm not sure those letters even mean anything. All right, your emergency pump might be a hand pump. We've talked about those. Might be electric driven, or it might be the rat. How many of you guys know what the rat is? Yeah, a couple of you. Ram air. I guess it's a turbine. Is it always a turbine?
Yeah.
Yeah, because the air turns. Okay. The rat's the ram air turbine. I got a picture of a rat. So a little deal that drops out of the bottom of the airplane, and it's basically a windmill. So yeah, that's the turbine part of it. So you drop it out when you're flying because you lost all your hydraulic pressure, but on these big aircraft, the hydraulics are what push the gear down, use the brakes. A lot of times they're the flight control. So there's a piece of where you go, oh, come on, Case, how's that tiny little hydraulic pump going to pressurize all this big stuff? And the answer to that is accumulators, which we'll cover in another class. But accumulators store hydraulic pressure, right? So we drop the little ram air turbine, and it's working its little brains out, pressurizing up all our accumulators. And then we're going to be really careful that we don't overuse all our gear and flaps and stuff. But it'll move fluid and give us pressure eventually. So that's an emergency hydraulic pump. Now they do make ram air turbines. Actually, I think they're all hydraulic. They might have an electric one that makes electric power, but to my limited knowledge, the ones that do electric power, it still provides hydraulic pressure, and then we'll take that hydraulic pressure and run it through a hydraulic motor and run it through a generator. So I think almost all rats are hydraulic. I'm sure there's some exceptions. A couple notes. A reservoir will often have a pressure relief if, what would be the if? The other way around. If it is pressurized. So if it's not pressurized, a lot of times our reservoir either won't have a relief or they might just have an overflow tube. So our Apache won't have a relief on the reservoir, it just has an overflow tube. But if we have a pressurized reservoir especially, we might have a relief. So let's say something goes wrong with our pressurization system and the pressure gets too high, or fluid moves around, the pressure's too high, there'll be a relief valve set at 40 psi, whatever it's set at, and that'll purge off our extra air pressure that's in the top of the thing. Usually it's going to be air that's bled out. But so it might have a pressure relief, it might have a sight glass like we pointed out. It might have a sampling valve so that if you want to check your fluid and say, is my fluid good or is my fluid bad? They don't all have that. They don't all have that, but some of them do. They might have a drain valve. They might not. Temperature transducer, quantity transducer. All these I threw in because they show up on prep work questions. So I just want to make you go, oh, okay, I know what those are. So everybody follow me on that? Any of those where you're like, I don't know what you're talking about? Okay, I just had to throw them up. I do my best to make sure that we at least talk about once every possible question you could ever get. Here's our pressurization module. We've got check valves in this thing. Where's my check valve? To keep our hydraulic pressure, if it were to get too high from coming back in. What would be one time where our hydraulic pressure is higher than our, well, maybe I should say hydraulic pressure. Our reservoir pressure is higher than our bleed air pressure. When would that happen? It'll come to you, and you'll go, oh yeah. Yeah, every time you shut the aircraft off. When the motor's not running anymore, the jet engine, we don't need bleed air pressure anymore, right? So every time we shut the aircraft off, our reservoir would still be pressurized, and we'll hold the pressure in there typically. So those check valves are going to hold the pressure in a reservoir. So one more time back to, if anybody asks you to service a jet, reservoir might be pressurized yet because we got some check valves holding the pressure in it. So we do have check valves in there. Test ports, we do not want to push hydraulic fluid back into our turbines of our jet engine. I don't think turbines want that. So there are various test ports on these things so that you can basically pressurize up your reservoir, take the pressure off the bleed air, and then put a gauge on there and say, hey, is that check valve holding? Are we sure it's holding? So there'll be a test port on there. And then manual bleed valve, just so you can say, oh, okay, yep, it's working. Let's bleed our pressure off this thing. And often gauge port to put your gauge on for testing. That makes sense? Okay. We're up to our fluid pressurized hydraulic reservoir. I think this one's going to almost carry us to the end, this concept. So this is the picture they give you in the book, and I hate it. Every time I look at it, I confuse myself. So I found another one that I'm going to explain it on, and then we'll move back to that one, because I don't think they give you that on writtens, but it's just a bad drawing. So this is basically the same concept of what's going on. So high pressure line means coming from my hydraulic system, maybe we're at 3,000 psi, whatever it is. We're going to put our high pressure hydraulic fluid into here. Now, as I put high pressure fluid into there, it's trapped in this area, right? This is a piston with O-rings. So if I were to, I don't want to necessarily say add pressure, but if I was to add pressure or if I was to add volume to there, it's going to push this whole mechanism, this T thing down. So let's say this is 1 inch squared down here, and let's say I've got 3,000 psi. Now this is a piston that's going to be, we're going to have hydraulic fluid in here as well, and that's our reservoir. So ground service panel, here we go, standpipe. So this would go to my pump, and let's see, what are the main 4 components we need in a hydraulic system? We need a reservoir. sight glass doesn't make the list. Just the 4, not check valve. It's a prep work question. Go all the way back to that very simplest drawing. They only have 4 components.
Selector valve.
Selector valve, good job. Selector valve. So if we wanted to be real fancy, we could draw it in like that, right? And what's the last one? Actuator. Actuator. I'm not drawing very good. Off my actuator, back to my return flow. Actually, technically, it's probably going to go like that, right? All right. So there's our complete hydraulic system. This is designed typically not to have any air in it because this might be on a helicopter where they vibrate like crazy. We don't want to shake the air into it. Or this might be a fighter jet or something you're going to fly inverted. So we try not to have any air in here. This area is, I'll draw in blue, generally just designed to have air in the backside. It's just a space generally. So if I put 3,000 PSI on my little 1-inch piston, man, that's big. Let's say, well, we'll do it this way. We want to say we want to hold 50 pounds of force in our reservoir. That's roughly what we said with our pressurized one, right? So if it was 50 pounds of force, how many square inches would that piston be? Let you do it while I do it, and then we'll see if we get the same answer. So I want,
Pressure.
say what?
What was the pressure?
I don't know. 3,000 down here. So I could do this one first. I could say PSI's here, right? 3,000 PSI across 1 inch is going to give me 3,000. That made it easy. 3,000 pounds of force on this piston, but basically I didn't. Yeah, so 3,000 pounds of force on the lever. So if I go up to this one, oh. What I meant to ask was, how do I get 50 PSI? Sorry, I said that wrong. 50 PSI. That's ultimately what we're trying to do, right? Is we're trying to pressurize our reservoir. So if I want 50 PSI is what I wanted. So 50 PSI in there. I said it was, how much area? We didn't know. But we had 3,000 pounds of force. So 3,000 divided by my 50 PSI that I want to keep it at, who's good at that? 300 divided by 60. So that would want to be 60 inches squared to give us 50 PSI supply pressure to our pump. Sorry, I misstepped in there. So does that make sense for everybody? The ultimate goal of a pressurized reservoir is to supply pressurized fluid, here it is, pressurized fluid to my pump. And the reason we pressurize it is maybe this guy's flying inverted at 50,000 feet, so we can get a better picture. So we don't want air in there, and we need to have it pressurized so my pump doesn't cavitate. So if I wanted 50 PSI, that might be a system we have, a 1-inch, square inch piston on the bottom, a 60 square inch piston on the top side, and that would give me 50 PSI of fluid, which, so what they don't have drawn in is 2 little O-rings right there, right? There, we completed the drawing. Everybody tracking on that?
Where's the high pressure line come from in that scenario?
It actually come from here.
With the regulator of sorts.
Yeah, you'd have a regulator valve and an accumulator. Yeah. Yep, we didn't get quite that far in our systems, but yep, exactly. You could say it come right off the accumulator pressure. It's our system pressure, high pressure in our system. Good question. All right, so without all the crazy numbers and extras, everybody kind of can get the concept of what we're doing there, right? We put in a very high hydraulic pressure on a small piston, make it a huge transfer plate, so we're going to convert maybe 3,000 PSI of hydraulic pressure down to 50 PSI to keep power to our pump. That is what this guy is doing too. It's just the way they draw it, it's hard to track. So this area here is this area here. It's our vent system. This guy is this section of the piston that's going to move up and down, which means this is the fluid we're worried about. That's going to go supply my pump. So, if I put pressure from my hydraulic system, 3,000 psi, in through this green line, what actually happens that they don't have shown is they should have given us 2 more O-rings here. And let's see, I guess they have the O-rings there. You could picture it like O-rings here, but they put them down there. So if I add volume to that green section, this whole T mechanism would move up. So you'd actually, let's say we add some volume, this would move up to be higher through, and now my T is in this position instead of where it was at. We have less in our reservoir. So that's how they're trying to draw that thing. There are a couple of them that look like that in the real world, is what the guy was trying to draw. And what they'll actually do is to know how much fluid's in your reservoir, instead of having a sight glass, they'll say, how far is that sticking out of there? Because if it's sticking really far out, that means we have very little fluid in our reservoir, right? If that little piece is not sticking very far out, that means the piston has dropped and there's lots of fluid in our reservoir. So that's closer to the reality of what an actual one is. It's just hard to understand the way they drew it. If you want to understand what's actually functioning, if you look at that one, you go, okay, I see what's functioning. It's just whoever drew that did not do us any favors. So look at that, ask me questions, look at it again like 4 or 5 times over the next couple weeks. Because when I was getting this class ready, it was the same kind of thing. I'm like, how does that work again? It's a terrible drawing. Ooh, I'm going to add that to the, if you have time after your labs. I see that hand. Pressurized reservoir. That'd be a good one to kind of build on a little metal sheet of paper so that you could move the thing and see it actual move in real life. I'd like that. Question?
Does that one have a return flow?
They just don't have it. They don't have it drawn in. It would come into this area here.
I didn't know if that was.
Yep. So that would be the return flow coming back into that area. Yeah. So it's funny, they drew it as a standpipe on this one. Kind of irrelevant, right? Because we don't, I mean, who cares what the top is when you got this kind of pressurized reservoir? But, whatever. Apparently that piston doesn't go all the way down, because if it plugged that hole, we'd be in trouble. So, maybe that's why I did that one. All right, one of your lab assignments is, you gotta look up, I believe this was the Korsky, if I'm not mistaken. And this is a pressurized reservoir system, and it's inverted right now. Actually, I don't know what the deal is with the picture. So basically, this red-black line is essentially attached to the piston on the inside, or however you want to phrase it that way. So if you, I'm not going to give it away, but I'm pretty sure the fluid is the red. It ends up on this side is where the fluid's at. So as the piston moves back and forth, that red line would move back and forth. So maybe at one point, the red line is right smack dab in the middle of the green. Probably you're in the good range then. Green is good. But, so your red line's in the middle of the black right now. Maybe if the fluid was at a certain level, it'd be in the middle of the red. Now, if you really look close at the instructions, it might say something like you gotta be a certain fraction of an inch one side or the other. My picture's not to scale. Ignore the fraction of the inch part and just say, hey, I'm in the black, I'm in the red, I'm in the green, and consider it that way. Make sense? More likely to lower high there. servicing section. Leo did a pretty good job yesterday. Anybody want to do it for me today? About a paragraph.
I'll do it.
Okay, David Alvarez. Now remember, you might be getting paid for this. Not today, but, alright, so where it says reservoir servicing, you're gonna read, and when you get far enough, I'll say, stop! But it's a couple sentences.
Non-pressurized reservoirs can be serviced by pouring fluid directly into the reservoir through a filler strainer or cage strainer, assembly incorporated within the filler well to strain out impurities as the fluid enters the reservoir. Many reservoirs also have a quick disconnect service port at the bottom of the reservoir. A hydraulic filler unit can be connected to the service port to add fluid to the reservoir. This method reduces the chances of contamination of the reservoir.
That's it, yup. Alright, the only reason I had you guys read that instead of me was, depending on how you wanna do it, there's a lot of different ways to service these things. We are worried about contamination, and we wanna do it in the best way to not be contaminated. But in the beach, we'll pour it through the top instead of using the hydraulic pump or mule. I believe the beach has two big old ports that you could hook an external hydraulic pump to, I think is what they're for. So like a ground unit. If you wanted to, I think, if you had that hooked up, you could just force some extra fluid in. But I'm not a beach mechanic per se, and I don't have the hoses for those big tubes. So we're gonna do it take the cap off and pour it in style. Okay. This is the Apache manual that I did just a screen clip from. Hard to read where you guys are at. John Stoll came to me, and I had originally told you guys yesterday, hey, find in the book where you hook up your external pump, because I thought the info I had was it'll tell you how to do that. Turns out, it tells you how to service the reservoir, and it'll tell you how to operate the stuff, but it doesn't tell you how to hook up an external pump. So I apologize. I sent you on a snipe hunt, a wild goose chase. But if you were to get to these pages, you've got filling the reservoir, power pack. Gravity just means you're going to take that hose and you're going to put fluid in it, basically until it leaks out behind the wheel. Where does it say? Hand pump. What I'm looking for is gear in the up position. Raise the gear. Flaps down. So it's gear up, flaps down is what we want to do when we're filling the Apache. Gear up, flaps down. And we're going to cover the actual mechanisms later and why that might be. It's because it's a different word for balance, but it's because our actuators are not balanced actuators. The pressurized system, pressurized, where to go? Filling, power pack, pressure. It's basically the same idea. It's just they have you fill it up off like a mule, and they're like, well, you might have had air in there. So they have you fill it up and then operate the system, and then check it one more time, I think is what it is, right? So they have you fill it, they have you operate everything, and then have you check it one last time. It is jacked up now, right? So we could operate that system. So if you get where you're done with, if we go to the schedule, it'd be lab 1 today, I think is all the farther you're going. If you want to operate that system, if you want to see it operating, grab me or one of the other instructors. Would be happy to kind of walk you through. If we did the whole class all at once, it's kind of a lot of people. So we can do it in little pieces. Dean said, not this particular aircraft, but, well, let me back that up. If you wanted to hook up a ground pump to that thing, say you're doing a lot of servicing, you could disconnect the 2 lines from the hydraulic pump and hook them up to a electric pump like a mule. The problem is with our mule, we have a pump and a reservoir, so it might mess with the amount of fluid in the reservoir in the system, and we'd probably bleed it all over the floor. You could do that in your troubleshooting, when you get that far, if you wanted to, you could theoretically hook the mule up to the hoses that are at the pump, the engine-driven pump. Otherwise, you can pump it by hand. Now, if your hand pump was busted and not working, that would make it tricky for, well, I can't use the hand pump anymore. We don't want to start the engine while it's on jacks, right? So how are we going to, so one other way that has been done is if you remove the hydraulic pump, it's got kind of a star-looking gear, and a certain size socket fits over it. So you can put like a DeWalt drill onto a socket over that thing and just run it, and you'd be running your hydraulic pump because the hose are a little flexible. They don't tell you that in the instruction manual for the Apache, but it's a way that you could do it. Dean used to do that on the 210 when they were servicing it. Same kind of idea. Just pull the 4 bolts for the pump off, hook a DeWalt drill up, and then when you're done, you put it back with a new gasket. Make sense? Cool. What is this? Cylinder? Close. Yes. Yes. We'll go with the cylinder. Anybody else?
Bleeding place, like zero.
Reservoir class. Reservoir class. It's a brake reservoir off a Cessna. So the brake system has a little bit of hydraulic fluid in it. So this line just goes to the braking system, the master cylinder that you'll step on. So this is the reservoir for a Cessna brake system. So maybe the fluid normally sits at that level. It sits right behind the pedals in almost every Cessna. So when you're doing inspections every 100 hour, for sure every annual, basically you're going to take that little plastic cap off and you're going to see if there's fluid in here. I think they'll usually tell you the depth. They got smart and they put a dipstick on the newer ones. That's handy. Otherwise, a toothpick or something. But if you ever have to check the brake fluid system on a Cessna, you're looking for that. These little dudes are crazy easy to cross thread in there, and you're already like, I'm pretty big to be a mechanic doing brakes on a Cessna, so they're tricky. But that's what a reservoir would look like on the brake. Now, that's where I'm going to say hydraulic system, right? It takes 5606. We're using hydraulic principles. I'm going to call it a hydraulic system, but there might be people that say, no, it's a brake system. Use the manual. All right. That is it. I will put these out on a table out there. The other number 1, number 2 are in the welding room if you want to do your own tests on those. And I think the lab speed recommendation is to do lab 1 today. Does that sound right? If you don't get lab 1 done today, it's not the end of the world. Lab 3, let me get to there. Uh-oh, where's lab 3? What is lab 3? There it is. Mostly hydraulic system questions. Oh, servicing the beach. So if a group or 2 wanted to start servicing the beach, you're welcome to do that because that's basically what we covered for reservoir class today. Now, don't mess with the jacking people, but you can start looking it up and figuring out how to do that. Okay, dismissed.
can light them up?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
See
sweet.
what you got him up?
Yeah, I did, but I gotta, you mixed them all up on me.
Yep.
I just need to light
If
up
you
the-
look at the bottom of the cans, one's stamped to 1 and one's stamped to 2.
Gotta just,
That'd be too easy, wouldn't it?
it would be. It would be.
So all I gotta do is light up them.
I'm just doing colors right now.
Now you're gonna have to look it up.
Blue, red.
Which one was right?
5606 is more flammable because it's not used in fiberglass.
My inclination with that was more flammable, I just wanted to do something, I'll say it.
My DEA joke didn't go well.
I thought it
You
was
did.
pretty funny.
You said, DEA guy yelled at him, said,
Yeah,
"That's
you did say
bad."
that.
You meant to say farm.
Oh, that's, shoot. I figured I said something wrong. So I'm like, that's a funny joke. Shoot. The farmer yelled, show him the badge. You've heard that one before. Tried to make it fancy so it was older.
You know who, Norm Macdonald is?
Sounds familiar, but no.
No, that's old. He has two opponents, so he's done this for kind of like, one called the Professor of Logic.
Norm Macdonald.
I can't do it justice, you can look it up on YouTube.
How long is it?
Oh, that guy's warm-up.
Really?
Yeah, I've heard a couple of his where he'll just like, he does a really good job of telling jokes by not telling jokes. Like, he leads up with a really good story and then it's just a straight fact and you're like, ah, what? Yeah.
I've got a Jerry Clowers joke story coming up for you.
Who's
In
that?
this class. Oh, man. He used to be a fertilizer salesman, but he told such funny stories that they had to press a record. That was like how old he is. Press a record of just telling stories. And I said, no, make tons of money. Kind of the country music scene back in the day. People used to sell all kinds of records, just telling stories.
Okay, when you get to that one, could you, put that in the book for me?
I didn't put it in the grade book?
There we go.
I'll do that next.
Appreciate it. Chicken scratch.
chance, you can look in this one and see the standpipe versus the emergency fills.
Hey Chase,
Yo,
say polyalpha-olefin 10 times. Polyalpha-olefin.
There's a polyalpha olefin?
Yeah. Wow, that sounds good. Polyalpha-olefin. Alfalfa.
83 something, right?
83282, something like that?
83-2.
Yeah, I don't know. Is it?
I remember that. 83, and then poly and then.
83282, you got it.
Oh, it's a 46170? Is that another variation?
I don't remember. It might have been. If you check my PowerPoint, it might
Well,
have.
I copied the notes right from it. It had like the
Was that the flame?
83-2 dash.
Maybe that was the flame resistant one.
Maybe.
What is it?
Was the poly one flame
That one
resistant?
had two.
Yes.
One of them had two mil spec cleaners.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Or that's the.
Is it? Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure.
Ryan got them both to light, so.
Must be the same.
It's on the, I think it's on the PowerPoint. They changed a little something on one, but
Like updated the
it's one we don't use much, so.
Typically for stuff we wouldn't be working with, like small stuff, it's
Yeah.
56 or 6.
Yeah, my understanding is nowadays you're pretty much 56 or 6 or Cyber. Pretty much.
Is Skydro common on smaller stuff? Or I shouldn't say common, is it? No, pretty much.
The big
bigger
use for
stuff.
fire hazard or high altitude, so.
Okay.
So our smaller stuff doesn't go to high altitude, and there's not enough fluid that we really care about the fire hazard.
Oh, right, yeah, yeah.
So like a little patchy gallon, 5606 isn't gonna make a big impact. I think with brakes, there might be, when you do braking, they might make a point of, it's nice to have the fire resistant to be able to break fire on a jet. That's another time that you start the stuff on fire, but.
Oh my God. I went out and looked at Tim, and if you like hold it up, it looks purple. If you set it down, walk away, guaranteed.
I'm going to put you up at 8 o'clock.
Can you explain to me the?
Go on and look at it.
Yeah, transducer means, it's gonna sense the pressure
But as soon as you
and
said it,
turn that into an electrical signal to tell an instrument we're at whatever pressure we're at. So the transducer changes a pressure into an electrical signal.
so it can be read by.
Exactly. Yep. So you could have a pressure transducer, you could have a temperature transducer, which would change a temperature into an electrical signal to be read. Technically, you could have a position transducer, but we'd probably just call that a micro switch. scheduled timing, I didn't have lab 3 until tomorrow for working on it. Not a problem to be working on it, but part of that is, when it says describe differences and whatnot, or describe the system, what I don't want is fluid from the reservoir goes through the pump to the actuator back to the reservoir. Because I'm like, just like every other aircraft in the world, right? I want to know what's specific about this system. So, like, is it an open center, closed center? Is it an engine-driven pump or electric pump? On the Aero specifically, if it has a airspeed diaphragm thing that'll drop the gear in emergency, well, it'd be kind of nice to know about that. So it's, if I said, hey, what's the difference between this and the Beach, or this and the 210, or this and anything else, those are the kind of things we're looking for. Not, it has hydraulic fluid, that if the fluid gets in a fire, it'll start on fire, and you gotta be careful. Yeah, okay, everything has that. I wanna know about the Aero, teach me about the Aero. Does that make sense? So same thing with the other ones that I come up. So if you're working